Hi everyone. Today we're going to talk about discrimination against immigrants. And in this video, you're going to learn about discrimination against two specific groups, the Irish and the Chinese. So first of all, I want to point out the concept of nativism. And as you can see by the definition here, this is a political position of supporting a favored status of citizens of a nation compared to newcomers or immigrants. It has become a general term for opposition to immigration based on fears that immigrants will distort or spoil existing cultural, religious values, gain too much political power, take jobs, etc. And I want to point out the flag on the left that says Native Americans. And as we know, the only true Native Americans were those that were here on the land before any Europeans came. And yet they co opted that slogan and used it in this flag to refer to native born Americans. So it's really important in this time period that when you see Native Americans, that you dig deeper to see if they're talking truly about tribes of Native Americans or native born Americans. So let's start first of all with the Irish. And there's a story that I want to tell you that talks about what is happening in this image. And it's important to know that the first group of Irish began arriving in 1820s, and they found a very bitter welcome because the Irish and English had a culture of conflict that went back many, many years, back to when the English colonized, just before the English colonized America, and they invaded Ireland. And so when they came, newspapers described them as a mongrel mass of ignorance. Many employers assigned Irish laborers to one of the most menial and dangerous positions that they had. Irish Catholicism was denounced with charges of superstition and concerns that they were trying to have the Pope take over America. In some cities, such as Philadelphia, which we're going to talk about here, there was such a strong anti Catholic and anti Irish feelings that they erupted into violence. So, to give you a context of this image of what is happening before it, in Pennsylvania, public schools in the 1840s had daily lessons using the King James Bible, and they were required by law. To the city's growing minority Irish Catholics, however, this Bible law represented a forced indoctrination into the Protestant faith. The Catholic Church recognized a different version of the Bible than the Protestants did, but Philadelphia authorities prohibited them to use their own version in schools. The mostly poor, working class Irish immigrants of suburbs like Kensington, where much of this is going to happen, did not yet have much of a voice in Philadelphia politics. Philadelphia's Catholic bishop did petition the school board. He said a daily reading of the Bible is fine so long as Catholic students are allowed to use their own Bibles and are excused from any Protestant devotional lessons. In January of 1843, school officials granted this request. However, a teacher lodged a complaint that divided the devotional was disrupting her classroom. And so the city alderman, who was also a member of the board of Kensington, his name was Hugh Clark, he advised the teacher to just stop all religious instruction until they could reach some kind of compromise. Well, that created a major issue. Irish Catholics felt that they were entitled to a voice in their children's education. At the same time, so did Protestant children, so Protestant parents. There's an organization called the American Republicans, which was a Protestant political party in Philadelphia. They held a rally to demand the resignation of this alderman, Hugh Clark, from the school board. Nativist leaders sponsored a referendum in 1844, meaning they wanted as an actual law passed in the spring election, asking the public whether or not Catholic students should be permitted to read from the Catholic Bible. Newspapers alleged that the Pope in Rome was pursuing a secret plan to seize control of American schools. Alderman Hugh Clark introduced before the city legislature a resolution banning Bible reading in all public schools. The nativists defended the old state law, and Clark was so angered he went into a Kensington school and tore the Protestant Bible out of the teacher's hands. Events soon spiraled out of control. As an outdoor rally assembled on Friday evening, May 3rd, 1844, Irish Catholics darted in and destroyed the speaker's platform. Onlookers began throwing bricks and rocks to disperse the crowd. Philadelphia during this era lacked a police force capable of handling a large public disturbance. Nativists announced their plans to return to Kensington the following Monday, considering there was no effective enforcement agency, only one sheriff of Philadelphia County. Several thousand people heeded this call. And in the midst of the opening speeches, there was a massive rainfall that happened, scattering people everywhere. Many found their way to a place called Nanny Goat Market, which was a pavilion large enough to hold the meeting. As they began to resume the rally, someone fired a gun. One of the nativist protesters, an 18-year-old named George Schiffler, was gravely wounded. Nativists by the hundreds then stormed the neighborhood, dislodging cobblestones to hurl through the windows of Irish stores and homes. A band of Kensington residents attacked the remaining protesters with brickbats and pistols. The Irish and nativist factions regrouped then on opposite sides of the market. By 10 o'clock, the nativists had swelled their ranks and were surging down 2nd Street toward the female Roman Catholic seminary. The sheriff ordered his men to fire their rifles over their heads. An assault of the seminary was averted, but angry nativists roamed the streets past midnight. The next afternoon, things began to continue to get worse. A shot rang out from a house across the street from the market, killing one marcher. Soon there was a volley of gunfire from rooftops and windows. 3 more marchers died. Then nativists sent a small party to torch a building in which several snipers were hiding. Within minutes, nearly 30 buildings were in flame, including Nanny Goat Market. Throughout the evening, things continued to burn. By Wednesday morning, only 3 men, all Irish, had been arrested for their role in the disturbance. Early that afternoon, nativists began making their way once again towards Kensington. Militia units patrolling the area were unable to quell the unrest. Marchers forcibly entered Irish homes to search for weapons. New fires, deliberately set, destroyed or damaged several more blocks by late afternoon. They began to march toward St. Augustine Roman Catholic Church. The mayor stopped in front of the church, asking for calm and reason. And then someone hurled a stone at him in the chest, knocking the breath out of him. Police guards hurriedly showed him away, and the rioters, now confident the church was undefended, began the destruction. Similar assaults that afternoon destroyed not only St. Michael's Roman Catholic Church, but also the female seminary that had been spared 2 days earlier. The fires produced columns of smoke that could be seen for miles. On Thursday morning, May 9th, the mayor convened a meeting at Independence Square to begin the process of restoring the public peace. In the 3 days of upheaval, 20 people had been killed, scores more injured, 2 Catholic churches, and more than 50 Irish homes destroyed. And so that is the context for this image here. And you can see that there's a massive amount of violence that's happening and between the Irish and the more native-born Americans, as they called themselves at this time. There will be additional skirmishes and riots between the Irish and Black individuals during the Civil War in 1863, as a part of the fact that Irish people were being drafted to fight to free enslaved persons who would then compete with them for jobs. But this Irish sentiment continued to jobs. As you can see here, there were frequently advertisements that say, we're desperate for employees, however, no Irish need apply, because they were considered to be beneath them. And in addition, you can see how the Irishman is portrayed in this cartoon here. They're portrayed as less than human. And another factor about the Irish to be aware of is that in addition to their concerns that the Pope was going to take over, they also thought that the Irish were drunks, that they drank too much, because in Europe, they drink a lot more than they do in America. And so that's why this guy here has his whiskey bottle or whatever it is over his hand, and he looks like he's about to start some kind of riot. And that's the Irish. Now, moving on to the Chinese, we're going to talk about the Chinese Exclusion Act. Big question to consider is, why was there anti-Chinese sentiment in the 1890s? And a lot of it has to do with what was going on at the time period. The gold rush had drawn people from across the world to California. In fact, advertisements in China said that the streets were paved with gold. And so there were many Chinamen that went to different places to try to not only find gold, but also ones that set up shop in places like San Francisco to take advantage of all the people that were coming, the miners and everything, and to make a living. And they established laundromats, especially in both the Western towns where gold was being discovered, as well as in San Francisco. In addition, the Chinese people had been hired to work on the railroads, and they were specifically helping to lay track from California to the middle part of the country, which ultimately there'll be a railroad that will join in just outside of Salt Lake City in Promontory Point, Utah. And on the right-hand side of the country, moving towards the west, the Irish were laying tracks. And you're going to end up having skirmishes as they get closer with the idea that many of these individuals would hire the Chinese because the Chinese were hard workers, they would show up early, they would work for less money, and the Irish resented that. And here, this picture is a very famous picture of when the two railroads, the Union Pacific and I forgot the name of the other one right now, joined together and drove a golden spike at Promontory Point, Utah. This is the Transcontinental Railroad. And here is a comment about the Chinese, that we warn working men that a new and dangerous foe looms in the far west. Already our brothers of the Pacific have to meet it. And just as soon as the Pacific Railroad is completed, these Chinamen will begin to swarm through the Rocky Mountains like devouring locusts and spread out all over the country this side. Men who can work for $1 a day are a dangerous element in our country. We must not sleep until the foe is upon us, or commence to fight him now. In the name of the working men of our common country, we demand that our government forbid another Chinaman to set foot on our shores. So to explain part of the concerns that they had against the Chinese, as I mentioned, were that they would work for very low wages. And you can see this cartoon in here, again, by Joseph Kepler, who we've already seen a number of cartoons from, showing that they Chinese individuals can work for so little money because they have no sense of family, they have no sense of personal space or anything nice. And so it was very derogatory against them. And there's a massacre. I'm not going to go into as much detail as I did with the Irish massacre, but in Rock Springs, Wyoming, there is a big skirmish that happens between the white workers who are working on the railroads and the Chinese, and it ends up killing many people. And it is something that is going to turn the employers against the Chinese at this point. Dennis Kearney from California, who's part of the Working Men's Party, which I already read the quote from, is really going to spearhead this campaign that the slogan is "the Chinese must go." And they're going to demand that no more Chinese people be allowed to immigrate into the United States. And in 1875, the Page Act is going to ban most Chinese women from entering the United States, and they will succeed in 1882 to set the Chinese Exclusion Act, which will be first passed for just 10 years. It will ban Chinese people from entering the country and prevent those that are already here from becoming citizens. It will continue to be renewed, and it will be finally removed and repealed in 1945. So over 50 years that Chinese were excluded from coming to the United States. And in the lesson that will follow, you will learn a little bit more about both the Irish and the Chinese.